Hello, everybody. It's Andy here, back in the Cube Design Dungeon in the studio, and I'm coming to you with a new cube idea. People have really enjoyed all the cube update videos for 100 Ornithopters and Sacred Geometry, and those are going to still keep coming. I know I'm also behind a little bit on those, but I will catch up. I will catch up on those videos because people really like them. I like making them. But one thing about those videos that's kind of annoying is that they're update videos. You have to kind of know the starting material for those videos to really make any sense. And I think it's kind of hard to document the early days of the cube design process because it's all very rough and you're just throwing spaghetti at a wall and then eventually it kind of coalesces together. But it's a little bit mysterious how it all happens. And because I've got a new cube idea that I expect to actually follow through on, I wanted to take this opportunity to document my cube design process pretty holistically. So let's talk about this idea that I have and get into what the first stages of cube design look like for me. And then hopefully this will become a very long video series where we design this cube together and I basically spend time designing it live on video with you. Obviously, this cube in front of us here, the ball pit, is not my cube. This is Jane's cube, and this is the main inspiration for the new cube that I'm designing. I played this cube for the first time at Inland Northwest Cube Fest in July of this year. It's currently at the end of October when I'm recording this, and it's kind of been in the back of my mind ever since because it's a brilliant, brilliant cube. One of my favorite cubes I've seen in recent memory. And this cube was also at CubeCon, which I just got back from a couple weeks ago, and there it was kind of the runaway hit, at least in the sort of, funky novel cube space. A lot of people really excited to play it, and I think it's going to spawn a lot of new cube ideas from a lot of different people. Here's how the ball pit works. You draft your cards as normal. The packs are bigger. I want to say it's 3x20. 60 cards. Yes, 3x20. You draft 3x20, and you just play every single card you draft. So you've got a 60 card deck. There is no deck building. And it's also a desert cube, so you have no access to basics into the draft. You just draft, and then you play. Obviously, that is kind of fraught because you're going to get a bunch of last picks, which are cards you didn't choose for your deck. They could be off color. They could be completely not even incompatible with your strategy. They could just be awful cards. And so this cube allows you to play any card face down as a copy of Chromatic Sphere, which is obviously a pretty radical rules modification. Every single card is metal double face card. Whatever is printed on it, and the back is a copy of Chromatic Sphere. And within those constraints, Jane does a lot of stuff that you might expect. There's a lot of things that care about sacrificing artifacts. There's a lot of things that care about just artifacts in general. There's a lot of ways to get sort of trinkety value. There's a bunch of copies of Mirror Enforcer. It's a really, really cool cube that is also kind of brain-bending and weird to play with. Here's what I love about this cube, though. What I really love about this cube is that I think a lot of us as cube designers, what we really want to do is get people to play with weird cards that we like. And to some degree, every cube is that, right? You're putting cards in front of people, you're getting them to play with the cards that you've put in the cube. But that sort of level of deck construction means that if you put some junky, weird old cards in there that don't really fit the sort of power level that expectations of people, the worst cards are always just going to get cut, right? You can put your favorite pet cards in there, but if they're just not good enough to see play, then people are not going to play them. And here, you're forced to play every single card. So, Lord of the Pit is here, I believe, mostly as a joke because it's the ball pit. It's, I don't think, very good here, but you're forced to put it in your deck. And then just, if you don't think it's any good, play it face down as a Chromatic Sphere all the time. There's also, where's that famous, that book that Jane loves? I think it's like a 3, here we go. Sarpadian Empires, Volume 7. 3 mana, comes into play, choose White Citizen, Blue Camerid, Black Thrall, Red Goblin, or Green Sapperling. And you can pay 3 mana to make a 1/1 token of that type. Pretty junky, but a very weird and strange card that I think Jane just wants you to look at and appreciate. And I think it's in here largely as a sort of pet card of Jane's. I think, honestly, some of these, like the Cauldra cycle, the Shield, Sword, and Helm of Cauldra kind of fit that just definition too. There are also cool altars in here of that. Just some cards that, are weird junkers that you probably would never have put in your deck, but you're forced to here. And I think that's beautiful. And one of the reasons it's beautiful is that sometimes you find yourself actually casting Lord of the Pit, right? You just end up playing it because even though you thought it was bad, you'd never put it in your deck, you draw it super late, and you happen to have a couple spheres lying around, and you're like, well, I guess a 7-mana 7/7 flying trample is better than just another sphere, right? Jane has stories of people playing the Sarpadian Empires Volume 7 because they were like, actually, I just want to buy some time. And people have, in fact, drafted all 3 of the Kaldra pieces and assembled Kaldra in this cube, which is crazy. 60 card decks, 1 copy of each card. You have to draft them all and then get lucky enough to draw them all. I imagine most of the time these are just getting played face down as like pretty underrated equipments, but every once in a while you just get to actually make Kaldra. And that, I think, is the brilliance of this cube. The fact that you end up playing with cards you otherwise wouldn't play with, and that creates these really joyous moments of discovery where you actually realize that this card that you put in your deck mostly as a chromatic sphere is actually something you are willing to cast sometimes. And it creates these fun little interactions between cards. So this is my main inspiration, and I'm not drawing so much on the rules modification itself. I'm not interested myself in pursuing another kind of zany rules modified cube where you can break the rules of Magic. What I'm interested in doing is trying to capture what I see as a portion, just a portion of the spirit of this cube in a project that has very, very few, if any, modified rules. I mean, it depends on how you define modified rule. And what I'm envisioning, basically, is a cube where you draft normal, 3x15. It is a desert cube. That is the one modification, so you don't get any basics out of the basic box afterwards, which most desert cubes are at least 18 card packs, sometimes more. They want to give you more cards so that you have more cuts to make, because if you only give people 45 picks and it's a desert cube, they only get 5 cuts. And that's what I'm imagining, is a really, really tightly constrained. You get some cuts, but not very many, just 5. I'm not forcing you to play literally every single card because I don't have that release valve of if the card is complete trash or like completely off color or whatever. Not that things can really ever be off color in the ballpark, but that's another conversation for another day. But even if a card is like completely off strategy or off color in my cube, I don't have this sort of ability to just play it, as a chromatic sphere. So I do want to have some cuts involved, and mostly I'm doing that because I also want to try to have this hue as close to normal Magic as possible, while still capturing and sort of emphasizing this beautiful spirit of playing janky, weird Magic. I've been really, really into janky Magic with bad cards lately, and I think there's a lot of joy in making people kind of assemble a messy pile of cards to try and find a win instead of just drafting a super focused deck, which, is a different taste. It's just I've done that so much in Cube. What I'm really craving today in my Magic life is playing janky cubes. And I've played a bunch of Cube events. And I love them. I love cubes that are really kind of harsh and the cards are bad and there's weird sort of constraints that mean you have to get creative to play in the space. So that's the basic concept. And what really pushed me over the edge into actually committing to this idea, recording this video, and feeling like I'm going to follow through on this was a name I came up with. And if you listen to our episode on resonance, you'll know that I think this is a pretty important thing, at least for me, when it comes to making a cube. The ball pit is a perfect name for Jane's cube. And having, I think, a name that is concise, that communicates something unique about the cube, that gives you space to express the idea and own it, is really valuable. And I've had these ideas kind of floating around in my head, and the name that I came up with is what really is going to make me actually, get excited to follow through on this. So it's 45 cards, you make 5 cuts, and by virtue of that fact, you end up playing kind of really creative or improvisational decks. You're playing cards in ways that are not intended to be played. It's kind of weird and out there. So I'm just calling it Take 5, named after the famous Dave Brubeck jazz single. I like this name a lot. Obviously, that's why I'm committing to this cube, and I think it's very clear that it communicates a lot about the draft. Take 5, you literally only get to take 5 cards out of your pool, and then you play. So that it alludes to the fact that it's a desert cube. It alludes to the fact that you're playing way more cards than a much higher percentage of the cards you draft than in a typical cube. And I hope also to people that get the jazz reference, it also expresses that it's going to be a little weird and funky. I'll make this no longer hidden now that I am putting a video up about it. Why not? So we are very, very early days in the cube design, which is to say, you notice it's 307 cards right now. I have only just started putting cards in here that occur to me, and I have made absolutely no attempt to balance this for card type or power level or anything. This is the spaghetti on the wall right now, and I want to talk through the spaghetti I'm most excited about and then talk through what the next step is going to be to get this cube to a place where we're moving through the cube design process. So, what I'm most excited about here, I am really excited about giving people access to cards that are going to occasionally matter in ways that they wouldn't expect, even though they're mostly expecting to use them in a certain way. So, for example, there's a lot of cards in here that don't actually, do what they say they do kind of on the tin, right? Like Squee Goblin Nabob, you're very rarely playing this as a 3-mana 1/1. That's not what the card does. Anybody that's played with this card knows that at the beginning of your upkeep, you just get it back from your graveyard to your hand, and what that means is that you just want to discard it. You want to discard this card for value, mill it over, maybe even. You just want to put this card in the graveyard, and then every card you have in the future that says discard a card as part of the effect, you can kind of just do one a turn for free, right? You're not discarding actual cards from your hand. You're just discarding Squee over and over and over again. There's a couple other cards in this cube that are in that same vein. So I'm trying to figure out how to sort this, and I'm still struggling with how to actually sort this, but I think it would be down here. Yeah, so Master of Death. Very similar. You can also get this back once a turn from your graveyard. Sneaky Snacker comes back if you goes back to play, actually, which makes it quite different. But when you draw your third card a turn, it goes from your graveyard to play, which means you don't have to be playing blue-black in your deck for this card to see play. Same with Master of Death. You don't have to be playing red to put Squee Goblin and Bob in your deck. It's basically a funny colorless card. But occasionally, you'll also end up in a deck where you can actually just cast these cards. And I also expect there to be a lot of discard here because I expect people to end up with bad cards in their hand, cards that are not on strategy for their deck, cards that are maybe even completely off color for their deck, and I want them to have something else to do with them if they're stuck in their hand. So you'll notice I've got pretty much all of the Masticores here, Razormane Masticore, Argentum Masticore, the original Masticore. These all have upkeep discard costs. So that's one of the ways I'm imagining people are going to be able to use cards that otherwise would be unplayable in their deck. I'm also thinking about other stuff like Imprint, for example. So I've got, Chrome Mox is probably the most famous Imprint card. I've got other ones in the list so far, but this is another way to use a card that you otherwise can't do anything with. You can just, imprint it under Chrome Mox. I'm also thinking about stuff like Aether Vial here, where maybe you do have a completely off-color creature in your deck, or a creature, like Master of Death that you're expecting only to discard in your, call it a red-blue deck. You're playing Master of Death with no way to make black mana. If you have an Aether Vial in your deck, you could still also eventually just put Master of Death in play. This is the kind of funky, weird stuff I'm trying to play with here. So the cards I'm really excited about and want to kind of focus this cube around are cards like Oval Chase Daredevil. Does the same thing as these other cards. You can get it back to your hand for free. This one, instead of being once a turn, is whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, and I expect artifacts and colorless cards to be a big theme here. In addition to giving you ways to use cards that are otherwise not part of your deck's core strategy, I also just want to have a bunch of very easy to main deck cards. So a ton of colorless cards, a ton of kind of trinkety effects that are yeah, sure. Are you thrilled to put Prophetic Prism in your deck? No, but when the screws are really tightened down on you and you can only get 5 cuts, I imagine Prophetic Prism is going to see main deck play almost all of the time in this cube because it's easy to put in your main deck. So Daredevil works with all those colorless artifacts that are easy main deck inclusions and sort of starts to fuel this discard engine in a pretty powerful way. Other things I'm thinking about. Cascade is a way to end up casting a card that is off color for your deck that you don't need to pay the mana cost for. So perhaps some lesser Cascade spells like Bituminous Blast makes sense here. I'm currently on Ethersworn Sphinx too. To say I'm on, by the way, again, I have not put any real thought into this other than just to throw cards that I think are interesting in a pile. And this pile is going to continue to grow. It's going to grow together. We're going to add some cards together. And then eventually we're going to start making some cuts, and we're just going to go through the process together. I've also found some hybrid cards that have colorless costs, like the 2 Aura Color hybrid costs. Flame Javelin's a good example. This is a great card in a red deck. Will you play this in a mono blue deck if you are absolutely strapped for playables? Sure. 6 mana deal 4 to any target is fine. That is probably... this is going to be a cube where that is going to be fine. This is going to be a low-power environment, so that's the kind of thing I expect people to be doing. I'm actually kind of really excited about the green one. Yeah, Tower Above. This is a cool one. Until end of turn, target creature gets +4/+4 and gains trample. Wither. Oh, Wither. I actually never even saw Wither on there. That's kind of crazy. And when this creature attacks, target creature blocks it this turn if able. So it's like a a fight spell with trample, and then the wither's another sort of bonus. It just does a whole lot. And again, great in a green deck, and also fine in another deck. I've even started. Yeah, I'll show this. I've even started just like drafting a couple test pools against the bots in this queue, but I don't have enough cards to be a full 8-pod yet, so I don't really take these drafts to mean a whole lot. But they do a very sort of basic level test of like, I wanted to see if I could draft a mono red deck, and I did. I drafted a functional mono red deck in this cube where, I've got Fairy Macabre, which I can only exile to my hand, or discard rather, only discard to exile 2 cards from a graveyard. I've got Noxious Survival, which is effectively colorless. I've got Tower Above, effectively colorless. And I've got ways to discard cards like the Faithless Looting, the Thrill of Possibility, the Tormenting Voice, and the Pirate's Pillage, all that kind of stuff. And again, Pirate's Pillage makes 2 treasures. So casting Tower Above for less than 6 mana, actually casting Fairy Macabre, not completely out of the question. Could also use those to activate abilities of lands like Restless Vents, for example. This is mostly in here just because it taps for red. It is a land that taps for red, but if I have a couple treasures lying around, the ability to animate this every once in a while or to filter mana through Prismatic Lens, I think is pretty cool. I'm also playing, like Remote Isle, which is pretty bad in this deck. Comes into play tapped wastes that has cycling. It's a pretty bad blasted landscape, but you got to hit the number of lands you need, and here I'm basically playing it as just a cycling spell because these are actually, much more uncastable for my deck. I can't really do anything with these, so this is kind of 2 mana draw card. 18 lands I think is okay with all the utility lands I have here, so I think it's possible to actually draft a monocolored deck maybe in this cube, or will be rather, when it is done. Okay. This is definitely feels kind of unfocused, but I hope people are kind of following me here. So the main themes I'm hinging the sort of early assumptions on for this cube are artifacts, and that led me to all sorts of artifact payoffs like Emery Lurker of the Loch and Psy Maverick Thopterist, and I always call him Maverick Thopterist, I don't know why, Psy Master Thopterist. Riddlesmith is a great example of a perfect card that is not just an artifact spell, but also allows you to discard those cards that you otherwise don't want at the time. Love Ret 2 Mystic in this cube. Giving all of your creatures cycling means that all of your off-color creatures now can just be cycled away. It's also a cool natural combo with all those creatures we just saw that you can get back from your graveyard for free, under some conditions. So anyway, small artifacts is definitely going to be a theme, and I'm still working on figuring out what all the cards are going to make be part of that theme. But your Chromatic Sphere, your Chromatic Star, Bauble, Expedition Map, Pyramid of the Pantheon, Scrabbling Claws, Terrarian, Collector's Vaults, Elsewhere Flask, Guild Globe, Ichor Wellspring, Key to the City, all just very easy cards to main deck in almost any deck. The next theme that I think is going to be pretty obviously emergent is lands. At least caring about your lands to some degree, because you have to draft all of them, and I don't want to just put, 15 copies of every basic land in here. Right now I have 5 copies of every basic land. There are going to be some in the cube, and this is the only card I plan on breaking Singleton for. No idea if 5 is going to be the right number. Again, spaghetti wall stage. But there's also going to be a lot of other lands that tap for colors, and so the mana bases in this cube are going to be complicated, and this is an opportunity to learn from Jane's experience. I know that Jane has drastically cut back on the complexity of the mana base in the ball pit because games are going really long, and one of the things people were to think about was a big swath of largely singleton lands in their 60 card deck, and like how to draft them, how to play with them. So that's a danger of this cube as well, is that the lands could be really complicating. I'm hoping that by completely removing the rules modification of every card be castable as a Chromatic Sphere, there's a little more room in people's brain for managing that complexity. So I want lands to matter in this cube. I want there to be lots of lands that do things, that have utility, and I want you to be excited about drafting them. Contrary to lots of other desert cubes, my initial thought is that I do not want lands to be super scarce. In a lot of desert cubes, it's meant to be a sort of unforgiving, punishing environment where lands are very hard to come by, and you have to really scrap and scrape for them. Here, I'm thinking my initial thought is put 160 lands in this list, which is on average 20 per drafter. And again, you're only making 5 cuts from a pool, so you're probably going to have a couple extra lands floating around. And if a lot of them do stuff, maybe you're even happy to play, 18, 19, 20 lands in your deck. That's my current sort of position, is I don't want this to be a space where it's like, oh, if I'm not careful, I will end up with not enough lands. I want it to be pretty easy to get the correct number of lands for your deck. I just want them to be flavorful and to do stuff. So I've just kind of dropped a bunch of lands. Again, just lands that came to me that I thought of. I had no sort of real thought process to it. The one thing I did do is I did go through and add a lot of cycling lands. Cycling obviously is also going to be very relevant in this cube because of all the reasons already aforementioned. Those lands led me to things like Summer Bloom, Life from a Loam, Splendid Reclamation, Regular Old, Exploration, even something like a Wood Elves here. There's a lot of forests, a lot of non-basic forests you can go get. It also led me to things like Sky Shroud Elite and Sky Shroud War Beast. These are things that punish your opponent having non-basic lands, but not devastatingly punish. It just makes your threat bigger for your opponent having non-basic lands. Part of not making lands scarce here is that I also do not expect to include land destruction of any kind, or at least certainly not as a theme. Maybe the occasional thing will pop up here or there, but mostly I want you to have your lands and get to keep them. I'm not trying to basically punish people's mana bases, except in the form of giving you a big trampling creature. Maybe that could be kind of cool. So that's, I expect, also going to be for sure a theme. You can see the artifact stuff also led me to things like Ariok Salvagers and Tashar Ancestor's Apostle. I also think eggs is a kind of naturally emergent thing here, but I also just love eggs. I love Brought Back Second Sunrise Face Reward. These are some cards I really am obsessed with. I also think a cool sort of sub-theme here is because if you draft all your mana, kind of rewarding you for getting multiple colors of mana, like things like Prismatic Ending and Painful Truths, I think I really like here. I'm also kind of really into the lands that filter mana. There's a million lands that you can just pay a mana to cycle a mana through. Hidden Grotto's an example. This is a pretty good example, honestly. Entering untapped and surveilling one is pretty good for a filter land, which historically are not very powerful. I want you to be including some of these so that you can occasionally do a weird splash that you didn't expect to do. This is where I'm coming from with this cube. You can see here I sorted a lot of these cards that can be played colorlessly into the colorless section. Street Wraith, Salvage Titan. You don't need to be playing black mana for this card to work. You can just cycle it away or discard it to something, and then just remove. I'm sorry, this is one that you can actually return to your hand. Yeah, you never need to discard it. You can just sacrifice the artifacts to play it for free. So this is really not a black card, and that's why it's over here in the colorless section. Though it also can obviously just be cast for 6 mana if you get there. A lot of these cards, I'm sure, here make no sense. Again, spaghetti at the wall step right now. So that's where I'm at with this cube right now. Knight of the Reliquary, another great example of a cool card that is in the lands theme. Cosmic Rebirth and Savin's Reclamation, great examples of cards that can let you discard a card you can't cast because it doesn't have the right colors of mana or whatever, and still get it into play later. You can see the kind of sort of janky things I'm going for here. I expect this cube to end up being pretty mind-melting. A fairly complicated cube, so definitely my most complicated cube, I would say. And I'm excited to explore that space because I have been all over the sort of map in terms of complexity for the past couple years. Sacred Geometry is very sort of restricted and reserved and simple. 100 Ornithopters is pretty complicated, but there's also very simple strategies you can play. It is actually not as complicated as people think because 100 of the cards are exactly the same. This is going to be a complicated cube. This is one that is going to take a lot of thought. I keep finding just cards I'm excited about. So I think the companions are also potentially very cool here. Unclear how easy it's going to be to meet the companion restriction of Garuda. But in general, I like hybrid mana cards a lot here because you can be playing blue or black to cast Garuda, obviously not both, which makes them easier to cast. And I think this just feels like a cool space for a certain number of cool companions. Is Garuda the one I have right now? Maybe it is. Anyway, here's the next step. Next thing we'll do is I'll make a video, and we're going to talk through adding a bunch of cards. We're going to just talk about more stuff to get in here, and our goal for the next video is to get this list over 360 cards. Ideally, pretty well over 360 cards. Then the next step after that is going to be to do a little bit of an audit and make sure we have the right number of lands. I want to get to 160 for the first draft. Right? Yeah, 160 for the first draft to make sure that we have a reasonable amount of interaction and have not just put a cube together where there's no removal of any kind. Just do a sort of light balancing for those kinds of things. Maybe go through and cut cards that are obvious power outliers. I can tell you right now that I think Drakehaven is going to be utterly cracked here. There's already a million ways to cycle and discard, and I think that might just be too good. So we'll go through and maybe do sort of a culling for things like that. And then once we get to a extremely rough 360, we will be running drafts against the bots. I will do this on video. We'll talk through playing against the bots and trying to force different decks, trying to see what feels good, what feels bad. I really truly believe that doing a lot of test drafts helps you. Cards just feel different when you're looking at them in a pack, right? Oh, here's another card that can be colorless. Dread Return doesn't have to be black. So I guess I put that in the colorless category. I'm unsure of how to sort these cards just yet. So if you have a good idea, leave it in the comments below. But I'm going to, I think, put that in colorless. I think it makes sense to me. Well, it's hard to say. Yeah, we'll start doing some test drafts, and then we'll start the process of refining this list and getting it down to something that is closer to what we want to play. I don't know if this is going to work out. Like I said, I believe that I'm going to stick with this. That's why I'm going through the trouble of making this video and starting this series. It is possible I get a little further down this road and just decide that this idea is fraught and has a fundamental flaw and either needs to change dramatically or it's just not going anywhere. But if that's the case, you're going to be along for that ride too. My sincere hope is that I will continue to be excited and motivated by this idea, and I'll get excited about the decks that are possible to draft in this cube, and it'll get refined and eventually be my next cube in paper. That is my hope and dream. If I could have you on for the ride the entire time and really document the whole process from like this absolute mess to what will hopefully eventually be a coherent cube, I think that would be a really valuable example for other people that are trying to do the same thing. Anyway, I also want this to be collaborative too, so if you have ideas for this cube, at this point, really high-level ideas or just cards you want me to add to the spaghetti wall, let me know in the comments below. And yeah, I'm excited to be on this journey with you, YouTube. Let's see how this goes together. All right, bye-bye.